while we're waiting, let me just tell you about a story club. That's who's presenting this, and it's supposed to be on their platform, which is an international platform for storytellers based in the U.S. and India, and now they're expanding here in the Caribbean. And I'm actually the brand manager here. And what we are doing is providing a global platform for storytellers, novelists, artists, businesses, all sorts of people who want to brand their stories internationally. And we're starting out, and they've asked me actually to talk about my book, Politics in a Half-Made Society, which is great. It's well, before I start, I'm going to get into my stories about that. But before I start talking about that, here's one thing. Well, this is the cover of the book here. And the cover was actually done by Chris Cozier. I'll talk about it because it's actually the story of how the cover got created is very much related to the book itself. And some people have asked me, let me pull it down close if you want to see it. They've asked me, what could you see? What is the meaning? Why is this the cover of the book? And it's an image that came to Chris Cozier's mind uh, from a metaphor I was referring to in some talks I was giving at Tapia House at the time when I was putting the book together, and I gave a series of lectures at the time. Um, but if anyone can give a guess as to what that is and how it is significant, um, we can answer that question later on. Oh, great! We have enough people to start. All right. I think I should start now. We have enough people. Great. Glad to see everybody here. Welcome to a Story Club's event. Uh, Presenting me, Kirk Mago. It's the first event done in Trinidad and Tobago. They've done events in India. They've done events in California, and I think in other places in the United States too. So this is the first one here. And so I will be talking about my book, Politics in a Half-Made Society. I was invited to talk about it by them, and I was pleasantly surprised when they asked me, because the book it's almost 20 years old now. But I did have questions. Some other people had actually also asked me if I would do a series of lives, and because this book, I meant it to be a definitive history of Trinidad and Tobago. And in fact, my intentions when I was writing it was for it to be able to last 20 years. And here we are about 20 years later. The book was actually published in 2003, but it was based on my thesis, which was finished in 2000. But it's 20 years, and I would ask you guys to judge to see whether you think it has stood the test of time. But that's exactly what I had in mind when I was writing the book, that this needed to stand the test of time, and that in 20 years somebody could pick up the book and read it afresh. And the reason why I did that, I was thinking about Naipaul. I was thinking about Gordon Lewis. I was thinking about Ivar Oxall, even Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery, or C.L.R. James. They write books in the 1930s, in the 1960s, in the 1970s, and you pick it up today and you read it and it's still fresh. Right? That was my aim, right? So that it wouldn't get dated by whatever jargon was popular at the time, right? Whatever was hip and trendy 20 years ago, because I knew in 20 years ago things would change. So I had to put myself in a different frame of mind. So I did write the book as part of my PhD thesis, which I was doing up in the United Kingdom at the University of Hull. I was the Wilberforce scholar up there. I had previously did my master's in Jamaica, and before that I was at the University of Toronto, and I was always interested in and studying development studies in the third world, and I concentrated on Trinidad and Tobago. And but I was also into a lot of other. At the time, I was the youngest lecturer on campus at UWI. If any of you, I know some people, at least one person is a former student of mine on the chat, on this live, right? There might be some other former students of mine there. If you remember me in those days, I had long hair on campus. I used to wear a kurta sometimes. I was, I had these radical ideas, and I, wanted to shake things up at UWI. And one of the things I did, I brought in a lot of. I was the first one to bring in postmodern theory of Foucault and Derrida and these kind of people, who now are really popular and standard, but at that time it was not. And I was actually bringing that analysis into Trinidad and Tobago, right? And when I was asked to be the Wilberforce Scholar and to go up to Hull in the UK to do this, I had this idea that I was going to make this, international splash with these cutting edge ideas and very sort of postmodernist and whatnot. But that, I sent my proposal out to all the top scholars around the world in the Caribbean on social theory, on social change and whatnot, and I got some good responses. But I eventually had to. I almost completed an entire thesis, an entire book in that first year, but I had to give it up. The book took me three. I made three complete drafts, right? The first one, and then I just threw it out. An interesting thing was one of the persons I had spoken to. One thing I remember is Dennis Panton, the late Dennis Panton, at UWI here. When I came for one of my fieldwork trips, because I would always be coming back and doing my fieldwork trip, I was speaking to him about my postmodern economics in Trinidad, and there's all this thing about economy of symbols and whatnot, and what a postmodern economy was like, and it was tied into service economy and all this kind of stuff. Well, I had put it to Carl Theodore. I remember he's now on this COVID-22 committee. Also Dennis Panton and others, and they were very excited. But I remember Dennis told me, like, this has nothing. These economic theories really have nothing to do with our economics, and as I started to look through these things, and then I remember another person from England. This is Danny Miller in London, an anthropologist at the University of London, who's done some great work on Trinidad. And he told me, "Wow, this is really good. You're kind of like doing an updated version of Selwyn Ryan." And when he said that, I realized that no, that's not what I want to do. That's not what I wanted to do with this book. It's not. Because for me, not meaning disrespect to Selwyn Ryan, but it was just argument. Right? It was just opinion and argument. And so one person had one opinion, another person has another opinion, and it goes back and forth, and there's no resolution whatsoever. So I threw out that first, because I realized when I was getting to the end, I said, how is this going to end? I'm just going to have to stop it. It was just pure argument. And it ties in with the whole that postmodern idea that there's no truth. And I said, no. Let me, at the time the way I put in these ideas is that I had this idea that at the time, Bastille Pandey was Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. It was our first trade unionist Prime Minister, our first Indian and Hindu Prime Minister. So many things had changed in the economy. We were starting a whole new oil and gas economy as well. The Soviet Union had just died. The Cold War had ended. So many things were happening. And I had this idea that we were entering in a post-Creole Trinidad and Tobago. And I had borrowed that from my very good friend, Burton Sankarali, a theologian and theorist in Trinidad. So we had, so I had put that out and was following that. But by the end, I realized what I wanted to, as I said before, was to do something that would last and not just be trendy, something that would follow Gordon Lewis, V.S. Naipaul, C.L.R. James, Eric Williams, and a lot of the people I critiqued, including, let's say, Lloyd Best, who at the time I was actually critical of him as being a nationalist. I realized that by getting down to the facts of the matter, I actually rediscovered some of the insights and things that he said. So really, the book was a struggle to be relevant through history, and I hope that it is. I believe it is, but ultimately it's up to you, the reader, to make that judgment. Um, I want to also say something about when I was at the University of Hull and I put it together. Now, it was every time I would go and do a degree abroad, it would really change my life. It would expand my world, right? Like when I went to Jamaica, for example, right? The University of Toronto, your first degree always does it. So in fact, that was probably the least transformative of my experiences. Although, by the end, when I, started to get all these academic prizes from the university, and then through there, I worked at Serval here. That was very transformative. Then when I went to Jamaica, that was a huge leap up. I worked with the top scholars of the region on Caribbean development. They flew them all in. It's a consortium graduate school. It was, just an amazing experience. And it was through that I went to Hull. Now, at the University of Hull, again, I thought I reached a certain sort of plateau and whatnot, but then it just pushed me further. There were two lords from the House of Lords in my department, right? One, Lord Norton of Louth, and then another, Bhikkhu Parekh, who was just made a lord while I was there. We had two lords there. Another person lecturing, he was an advisor to Ronald Reagan, right, on the Strategic Defense Initiative. And he, was the head of the Security Studies Department. And then we had another person, Noel O'Sullivan, who was the leading conservative theorist in the UK. And it was just like I was just meeting these people, just doing cutting edge, not just, within the world of academia and the world of ideas, but in the world of action as well. And then one of my friends, who was also a colleague, who was also doing his PhD, he was doing it on the conflict in the Western Sahara. I don't know if you guys know about that, but there's border conflicts and who owns a territory in the Western Sahara. And when we were going to go in the summertime to do our field work in our respective countries, I was asking him what he was going to do, and so he was taking a UN chartered plane to the Western Sahara. And would be talking about it there. And I said, wait, what really am I going to do about this book on Trinidad, right? What is this? How can this, stand up to these people? Oh yes, I forgot to say, my supervisor, Paul Sutton, worked with Eric Williams in producing Forward from the Love of Liberty. I should have brought the book here to show you, which is a collection of Eric Williams' speeches. So, and then there was Ivar Oxal there, who did Black Intellectuals Come to Power, probably the best book on the Trinidad independence experience. So I had all these people doing amazing work. I said, really, am I just going to talk off the top of my head and just write something and people would say that's so smart? I said, no, I can't. I have to do something that matches the type of level that these people are doing, something that could stand in international scrutiny. So I decided then and there, I was going to interview every prime minister, living, past, every cabinet minister, every president. That's what I was going to do. Nobody had ever done that before, right? And what basis could I really do that? I didn't have, I just said I would do it. That's all. I didn't know Bastille Pandy at the time. I had no connections to meet him. I didn't know any of the prime ministers. I did have a connection to Patrick Manning, through my father, yes. So I did have a connection there, but the others, I really had none. But I said that's what I would do, and I did that. So as I was doing that and getting these firsthand accounts from people like Ken Gordon and Bastio Pandey and Patrick Manning and A&R Robinson and Ellis Clark, and having these amazing conversations with these people to understand how it was going through the Black Power revolution, going through the coup, going through independence itself, writing the Constitution, using these people's firsthand accounts in my story of Trinidad politics. I realized that the politics of Trinidad and Tobago itself was a story, and there was a beginning, a middle, but we hadn't reached an end. At that time, I was very, very, very into V.S. Naipaul at the time, and in fact, my book, the title "Politics in a Half-Made Society," it comes from V.S. Naipaul. That term, the half-made society. He talks not only about Trinidad, the Caribbean, as half-made societies, but sometimes when he goes when he went to different countries, he talked about half-made societies. Now, people have always interpreted that as being, insulting. I don't know if it's any more insulting than calling us developing countries or poor or third world. Sorry, I needed that drink. But it's a different angle. It's something else. He did not mean a poor society, because I was always curious when he called the Caribbean the third world's third world. Certainly he wasn't talking about income, because Africa and India were much poorer than the Caribbean, especially when he was writing in the 70s and 60s. What did he mean that we were the third world's third world? He didn't, and he never really used terms like developing countries, and when he talked about being a colonial, he had a very different view of what it meant to be a colonial. He wasn't talking about exploitation by the rich on the poor, or by white people on Indians or Africans or Latin Americans or others. He was talking about the way colonial people thought of themselves as inferior, right? And the way we who think of ourselves in an inferior way act, behave, and create or don't create societies. So I really thought that it was a very, very, very important insight he had that helped us understand Trinidad and Tobago. And instead of going on this postmodern thing and this sort of argumentative thing, I started to understand by going through the whole history of Trinidad and Tobago that there is a story. There's a story of us as a half-made society, as a new society, a recently settled society that does not have a sense of order. And it makes us very different from a place like Jamaica or Barbados that has a much longer history than us. We were really only settled from 1783, right? The first 300 years of Spanish settlement, it ended up with just 126 white families, right? Which is not even a mall, right? Or a movie theater, perhaps. And that was the whole of Trinidad. So we were colonized very late. By 1783, Barbados was a mature colony. Jamaica was a mature colony. Antigua was a mature colony. We had just started by then. And I realized this is how I understood Eric Williams. Eric Williams understood this. V.S. Naipaul understood this. Lloyd Best understood this. And Eric Williams, who is still the most important figure we have to understand. If we want to understand Trinidad and Tobago politics, we still have to understand Eric Williams and what he tried to do. I critique what he tried to do, but I understand why he tried to do it. He tried to bring in order in Trinidad and Tobago. He tried to bring in discipline. But if you understand and appreciate the nature of Trinidad society, which is fundamentally fluid, anarchic, chaotic, it's an impossible task. And that is the tension. And you see this throughout the development of Trinidad and Tobago, the frustrations, the attempts, and the way that we haven't yet, as a country, come to terms with this fundamental anarchy, this fundamental chaos, this fundamental fluidity. But it's also what I love about Trinidad. It's also what's so amazing about this place. Um, it's it, it is what makes this place lively and unpredictable and complex, and uncontrollable, which is and free. That is so important, right? And I think, and we see it in the history. And as I go, this is the first of a series of lives I'm going to do, right? So and as I get it, and I'm not really getting into the chapters and the full story here. I'm paving the introduction here, and part of this introduction is, so as we see the attempts to deal with the nature of Trinidad and Tobago through the politics, and we see the successes and we see the failures, we start to see where we are today and why we are where we are. A lot of the theories that, when people have this idea that Trinidad is a place that is a racial tinderbox that is going to explode, I disagree with that. Because as part of the thing, I was telling you, when I was in the UK, the people who I met, who either worked with Eric Williams, be it Ivar Oxal or Paul Sutton, or they were working with the UN, or they were lords in the House of Lords. Other people who I had met, for example, I become friends with Kofi Annan's niece, right? That was a very interesting friendship. Also, Nigeria at the time, the vice president, it's the vice chair of the ruling provisional council. They were making their transition to democracy, and who the vice president, right, which is the vice chair of that council, his son was at the University of Hull, and I actually was invited to go to Nigeria to witness that. And that was very interesting. You have ethnic conflict there. You don't have that in Trinidad. I went to India. I was able to visit India and understand the incredible diversity there, which is far greater than we could ever imagine here, than we have here in Trinidad. I spent a lot of time in Singapore as well. That was seen as the model state that we should be emulating. And I really got to understand it, becoming close to, one of the major newspaper editors there and whatnot. And there's a lot I admire about it, but it's different from Trinidad and Tobago. Right? And this is where I really started to develop my relationship and friendship with Lloyd Best, because I started to finally understand where he was coming from after criticizing him for so long. We have to come to terms with our true nature, who we are as a society, in all its cantankerousness, in all its division. And the point I was talking about was the racial division, right? So the thing is that in a truly racially divided society, we would have exploded in violence a long time ago, right? Because that, for instance, during Black Power, right? It wasn't, black people fighting Indian people or white people in any way like you would find in South Africa or in Uganda or in Malaysia or in Indonesia or in Burma or in so many other countries around the world. That's not part of our culture. When you go to these places, you start to see, for instance, I realize in Singapore, with most people live in government built housing, or many people, a vast majority do, and it's a much better quality than our NHA in Trinidad, but they have this idea that you should not be building ghettos because they went through a lot of ethnic crisis that we never faced here in the 1960s with the Malays and the Chinese, and to a lesser extent the Indians, but really it's the Malay and the Chinese. And so to avoid creating Malay ghettos, because that's what Singapore wanted to do, if you want to sell your house, you could only sell it to someone of the same race as you. So therefore, the racial composition of the neighborhood is always scientifically guaranteed, right? Because if I was to then sell it to a Malay, then there would be more Malays than was planned. And so how do they know what race they're selling it to? Well, one is that there isn't as much racial mixing in those societies as you find in Trinidad or the rest of the Caribbean. We like to say we're divided, but we have a lot of mixing. So that's one. And two, if there's any question, it's written on your ID card what race you are, right? We don't have anything like that in Trinidad, and we never will. I don't think so. I mean, okay, maybe you should never say never, but it would be a huge break if we did, and there would be a lot of protests. It wouldn't be something that would be done easily. It's not something I would advocate either. I would be against it, and I think a lot of Trinidadians would also be against it, Trinidadians and Tobagonians. But as I started to understand these racial dynamics in these other societies, I realized it's not race. Race was not the problem. What it was more enemy. We had no national sense, and that's not our fault. It's because of the way we were settled, and the fact that, as Naipaul said, nothing was created here. One of the questions Naipaul asked, which I struggled with trying to answer in my book, was, how do we write a history of Trinidad and Tobago? Because Naipaul put it so well in his middle passage. He said, history is built around achievement. And in the West Indies, nothing was achieved. Now, people take a lot of offense at that. But he was writing in 1960. And we were still colonies. He was criticizing British imperialism, British colonialism, that they did nothing with these colonies except exploit us. Right? They built nothing. They built no great universities like the University of Havana in Cuba, or like Harvard in the United States, which was built while it was a British colony, right? Or in other colonial settings where, like if you go to Mexico City, what the Spanish built there, they're great plazas and cathedrals and universities, or what was even built in New France in what is now Canada, what was built there, or in other settler colonies. Nothing was built in the West Indies. It was just a barracks, right? We still live on the old slave plantations, whether it be Valsayn or Blue Basin or where I live in Point Pleasant Park. These are old plantations, right? And where the slaves used to live, and then the indentures later, and now, the gated communities. But we are still living on a society that was never created to be a society, right? So that was a very tough question. So how do we tell the story of Trinidad and Tobago? And then I realized that was the story itself. The story is that we are a half-made society. right? So you can say that like and you can look at that in two ways, that the glass is half full or half empty, right? So in some ways, yes, it's half empty, but in other ways, it is half full, because we have also created a half of a society. And let me also, while I was doing my research with Lloyd Best and Tapia, I came across an amazing analysis of by Peter Funky Fung, um, who was talking about when the NAR came in 1986. And for those of you who don't know the history of Trinidad and Tobago, um, this is we had one party ruling us for 30 years. And I mean, there were Black Power revolutions and trade union agitation and so many states of emergency. And there's a lot of tumult. It wasn't a dictatorship in the way that you'd find dictatorships in other countries, but it was like a one-party state, And in 1986 was the first time that it was broken. But that party, the NAR, which was made up of a lot of different opposition parties, the ULF and Tapia and the ONR and the DAC from Tobago, it broke up within a year. And so we did not, and to this day, we are only now sort of in a two-party system. We don't really have a two-party system. Um, and I can go through that later, why it is objectively and scientifically we don't have a proper two-party system. But so people felt that when the NAR party came and finally got government in a sweeping victory, which was almost like Fernando, the ousting of Marcos in the Philippines, that was happening around the same time, and around the world, a lot of dictators were falling around that time. So people were saying, "Oh, well, we finally have a two-party system now, the NAR and the PNM." But the NAR fell apart. And Peter Fung's analysis was, what we have in Trinidad is not quite a one-party state, and it's not a two-party state. We have a 1.5-party system. And I thought that was great, and it was really, really insightful, because the opposition was so chaotic and fluid. But if you understand the history of Trinidad, that was actually how our politics was before the PNM came in 1956. Right? And so, again, it ties into the story of us trying to develop a politics that truly reflects ourselves, that truly taps into our great potential and where we reach the flowering of that potential. And in my view, the PNM experiment, which is what Williams engaged on very explicitly in 1955 and 56, it cannot deliver because we are not that. Right? The PNM, as we go through, we will see that the PNM try and continue to try to impose a model, a sociological model on Trinidad that is not based on the true nature of Trinidad society and culture. Right? So that is really, I don't say this explicitly in the book. I'm telling you this here, right, in our discussion. In the book, I just let the facts, come out in the story itself. And I believe that is the conclusion. Maybe there are people who have read my book or who will read the book, look at the facts, and maybe they might come to a different conclusion. I'd be very interested if you do. But I made the book open enough, and that's how I made it to last the 20 years, so that there can be more than one interpretation. Because great art is like that too. You're not supposed to tell people exactly what to think, right? You stimulate their mind and let them start to think and make their own conclusions. And then sometimes, a piece of art, it escapes the original intention of the artist, right? And I do have to say that I do consider my, the book to be somewhat, of an art of being novelistic. And, you know, whether it be Naipaul or James, they were novelists as well, or some of my favorite people like George Orwell, right? So that when they wrote about politics, it was also literature and art. And you need to bring that sensibility. And Lloyd Best, who I love and who I later became very, very close to, he always thought like an artist as well. Right. So, um, so when I decided that, you know what, I'm going to use Half-Made Society as the title of my book, but I knew that that would cause some trouble, right? Because it's not, it's not like, books that, celebrate the victory over colonialism, or these sort of celebratory books, which I think actually hide a lot of the truth, are dishonest, lie, right? Just, for ideology's sake. I did not want to do that. And I didn't think we need to do that, right? You don't have to lie to feel good about yourself. You can be honest with yourself, see your flaws, and still not hate yourself. But anyway, when I had, one of the times during my research and going to UE and talking to people, one of our leading historians, when I told him the title of my book, what it would be, Politics in a Half-Made Society, he just sort of looked at me and was shocked. And he said, you can't have that title. That's, it was just out of the, everything is supposed to be a celebration, right? And but when he he said that, I said, well, why not? He said, you don't know the type of opposition you're going to get. I said, well, I will take that. But that only made me want to go with the title even more, um, than I did at the moment. It showed it to me. It proved to me that I was on the right path, because I wanted to disturb people. I wanted to make them think, to shake them up, because the way sometimes when we talk about our history, the way we talk about it, there are two extremes. One extreme is to celebrate it, and to talk about the great victory, and of over colonialism, and what we've done, etc. Right, and to sort of patch over the problems, not only the problems imposed on us externally, but our internal problems as well. Then on the other hand, there are people who are totally critical and totally dismissive, and who think this country is a total failure, and that there's nothing redeeming about this country, and it has no future. And I don't agree with that either, right? We have built an amazing society, right? I do love this place, That's why I could have stayed in the UK. I could have, stayed in Canada. I could have been in many other countries, in the US, or other places, in fact. And I love traveling, and I love visiting those countries. I love knowing about them. I love having my friends and my contacts in all of those countries, and maintaining those contacts, and flying out as often as I can. I don't know if after this COVID crisis how our travel is going to be affected, but I think it will be badly affected. But uh, but Trinidad and Tobago is my home. We have built a country here. Our ancestors have built it from scratch, and it reflects who we are, right? We can only truly be ourselves here and express ourselves fully. To put ourselves in another context is like a kind of ethnocide, right? But that's another issue that I won't necessarily go into too much detail here. But the reason why I talked about it is that this book is critical, yes, but I'm sort of, in telling the story of Trinidad politics and the half-made society, I'm sort of telling the story that hasn't concluded yet. We're still in the middle of it. We are still, and the task, and that's a constructive task. Because I remember one of my Jamaican colleagues asking me about this, and saying, how, what a negative view of your country you're portraying in your book, and so forth. And, what is it you're trying to do? I mean, are you trying to, lower the image of your country? Right? Now, I'm not into, bolstering the image, right? It's knowing the truth. That's what it is. But I did tell him that, if the problem is that we are half made, then that means our project must be to make a full society, right? So, so that means we have a task, we have a project, right? So we have to see in what ways we are half made, and in what ways, and what we need to do to fully make ourselves. And this is really what Eric Williams tried to do. And so let me get to the cover of the book, which I was talking about before while I was waiting to have this live people. Now, let me see if you could see it. Let me bring this down. Can you see it? Right. So this is an original piece of art. It's a watercolor by Chris Cozier. I think it's great. I'm really thankful and privileged to have this. He actually has given me the original piece. I have it framed in my sitting room, and but I don't know if you could understand what this means. I was at the time. Now, I told you my PhD supervisor was Paul Sutton, Dr. Paul Sutton, and he had worked with Eric Williams on making a collection of speeches called From the Love of Liberty, which is out of print, sadly. And I'm actually working with Erica Williams right now to try to get it back in print. But it's a collection of all Eric Williams' speeches he ever made from 1955 up to his death in 81. And this was actually published the year of Williams' death. Right? So it was the last project Eric Williams worked on. And he gave Paul all of his speeches. It was boxes and boxes and boxes of speeches that he had given to Paul, and Paul would sort it out, and he put the book together in collaboration with Williams. I was extremely privileged for Paul to give me those, right, while I was doing my PhD. So in my flat in the UK, I had stacked up all around me these boxes and boxes of speeches of Eric Williams. From the time before he got into politics to the time he formed the PNM, and to all his frustrations as well, because he was a very, very he was constantly frustrated with Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know if people understand that, really. He was constantly frustrated from before he started to the time he died. And it was fascinating reading his speeches. It was just amazing. And I really got to understand the man and how he thought and what he was trying to do. And there, I think, is an air of tragic futility in what he was trying to do. There's a metaphor that Eric Williams used all the time, and very curiously, it's something that Naipaul used all the time too. It's a metaphor of the bush. Trinidad, for them, was like the bush. Anarchy, chaos, disorder, right? And Eric Williams always talking about making a clearing in the bush. Naipaul always talked about a fear of the bush encroaching back on civilization. And this became very important for me to understand in terms of, and then when I was looking at the Spanish history of Trinidad and Tobago, the British history, that Trinidad and Tobago is such a disorderly and anarchic place. But I say that in a very affectionate way, right? Because I like, there is something very appealing about the anarchy and disorder. And it makes us irredeemably free, right? We cannot be controlled by a dictator because of this inherent attitude that we have, right? But it makes order very difficult. And so I use this idea in my talk at Tapia House about Trinidad sort of being a place of bush and people like Eric Williams. What he tried to do was like try to create a clearing in the bush, and that was supposed to be the PNM. And he was going to give order and discipline and direction to Trinidad and Tobago. And yet by the time you finish clearing out one end, the part you cleared out before, the bush is already coming in, and you have to go back and clear that out. And when you finish that, a next set of weeds and bushes coming over there, and it's just to maintain the clearing is a huge headache in Trinidad and Tobago. The sociology, the culture, the way we are, right? And that and this was Eric Williams's self-appointed task, and what frustrated him so much. And this is what, and then Chris Cozier, sort of after my talk, went home and he was struck by that image so much, and he made this picture of this clearing in the bush, and then he had these three types of people in different stages of dress, and these are sort of like different classes of people. And there's obviously the Williams type figure, and maybe the political activists, I suppose, and the workers, and trying to make this clearing in the bush that is Trinidad and Tobago. And it's very interesting that not only are we half made sociologically in that sense, because that's what I've been talking about, but physically as well. The country is literally still half bush. It's 50% forested. If you fly over Trinidad and Tobago in a plane or an aircraft, you will see that it's when you get outside of Port of Spain, the East-West Corridor, and the highway, most of the rest of Trinidad is still covered in green. We are still a physically half-made society. We haven't yet fully settled the island. Think about it. This island is only 1.3 million people. We should really have much more people here. And the idea of the half-made society too. What I also wanted to raise was the idea that in 100 years, can we guarantee that Trinidad and Tobago will be here, will exist? Will Venezuela take us over? Will we become a state of the United States in 200 years, in 500 years, right? 500 years ago, the United States didn't exist, right? There are many countries in the past that don't exist anymore. Great societies, Babylon, or the Society of the Hittites, or in different kingdoms of Asia, of Africa, that were once here, were once great, and have gone. What is the future of Trinidad and Tobago? Are we going to eventually disappear from the face of the earth? Will we get absorbed into North America or South America? Right? We recently had these Venezuelan immigrants coming here, and really, what's stopping 1 million Venezuelans coming here? And if 1 million Venezuelans come here, what does that mean for the existence of Trinidad and Tobago? What if 2 million Venezuelans come here? Right? Do we have the type of society and culture and civilization? Ultimately, that's the type of questions we want to go for. Do we have a civilization that will last? And one of my popular papers on academia.u is this question on Caribbean civilization, and that really follows from a lot of the questions I raise in the book about how to think about Trinidad and Tobago. What do we have here? What are we building? And for how long are we building it? And that's a real question we have to ask, in terms of, we have all these all these elites, all the brightest people that our education system produces, what is their goal? So many of our open skulls, their goal is to get out of this country, right? Eric Williams' children don't live in this country, right? Well, Erica, right? Um, there, and he's the father of the nation. What does that say? What does that say about our country? What does that say about what he wanted to build? How is that different to what Naipaul talked about, that nothing was built in the West Indies, nothing was achieved? They never meant to build anything. The colonialists never meant to build anything lasting here. They just meant to make money for a while and have their overseers do a work here for a while and go back, because really the big owners didn't even live here. Just like today, the biggest enterprise in Trinidad and Tobago is BPTT. The owner of BP does not live in Trinidad, will never live in Trinidad, has no intention of living in Trinidad, and so really does not have an interest in building up the society of schools and roads and infrastructures and cultural centers and recreational places and all these things, to make a full life, right? And one of the things that Lloyd Best complained about a lot is that we don't think long term like that in terms of building something for the next 50 years, 100 years. Do we think like that in Trinidad and Tobago, or do we think, if things get bad in the next 20 years, I'm leaving? Right? How can you build a society based on that? So in a society like that, what's the politics going to be like? Right? What is the politics going to be like in a society where the elite want to leave and don't plan on staying? What is and when you start to look at it from that angle, then you start to understand and get certain insights into why politics has unfolded the way it does. Because while you have that, you also do have another side of something really great also being built here. A great fusion of cultures, a Trinidad cultural complex. This is where I would differ with the Creole nationalism of the PNM, right? They try to build a single national culture, and it's defined by pan, calypso, carnival. Basically, that's it. That's our national culture. And that has been criticized in so many ways. And I won't go through all the criticism, but partially it's an ethnic criticism. Where does it come from? Who does it represent? How widespread is it? But there's also political criticism, as well as, when the state gets control of these things, it fundamentally alters the nature of it, and it corrupts it. It corrupts the purity and spontaneity of the art forms that they are, right? But what I want to say is that the culture that we have built here in Trinidad and Tobago is something very much more complex than that. And in fact, there's a great piece done in the 1950s, before Eric Williams came on the scene, about 13 different ethnic groups in Trinidad. 13, not 2. And very interestingly, later on, Lloyd Best in 1981 talked about the 9 different ethnic groups in Trinidad, the 9 tribes, the political tribes, which is almost exactly the same as the 13 groups that was identified by Daniel Crowley. And let's see, I should have brought up the list of all the 13 groups, but the 9 tribes that Lloyd Best talked about was not only the Afro-Saxons, right, who are the Africans who are fully acculturated into Anglo-Saxon, the Anglo-Saxon world and excel at it. and Anglo-Saxon culture. Then you have the Garveyites, who are kind of like the rebels, the black rebels against that system. And then you have the Butlerites, who are also sort of black rebels against that system, but are based on trade unionism and economic exploitation rather than culture, right? And so the Afros kind of are really three groups, not one. It's like the Indos are also really three groups and not one. The Presbyterians, who are very much like the Afro-Saxons. You don't necessarily have to be religiously Presbyterian, but you are acculturated into Western society. That's a strong group in Trinidad and Tobago, especially in the South, who went to all the Presbyterian schools. And you have the Hindus, of course, right, which is the largest group, and traditionally was based in rural Trinidad and all in central as well, as opposed to south. And then you have the Muslims, another very interesting and important group, because they were able to interact with the Christian world in a way that the Hindus could not. And that's why you'd find in San Fernando and in San Juan these very strong and important Muslim communities that were engaged in business as well, but they had a very different relationship with the others. And so the Indian group is not just one, it's three. And then, of course, on top of the three Afro-Trini groups, you have the Tobagonians, who interestingly are a lot like the Garveyites, who reject or who aren't enculturated into the British Afro-Saxon way of life culturally, but also they are very much like the Hindus. In terms of traditionally being based on agriculture and living a sort of clannish, family-based life based on the land and whatnot. And that's why the Tobagonians and Hindus throughout Trinidad and Tobago's history have made alliances, whether it's the DAC and DLP, or whether it's within the NAR or with the NAR UNC later. So this dynamic is very interesting. And who knows in future what alliances may be made with Tobago. All right, so you had the three groups, three Afros plus the Tobago plus the three Indo groups. And then you have, of course, the French Creoles, which may not be French Creoles at all, because you include the Syrians and the Chinese and the people who are descended from the British as opposed to the French and maybe the Portuguese. And even they were differentially incorporated. So they're not equal, because within that French Creole group, there's a lot of division within that group. Although, so you could still consider them a tribe, but it's a complex little tribe there. And then you have the Nowhereians, right? So Lloyd talks about these people who can't fit neatly into any one of those tribes, right? Either they were educated abroad, or mixed marriages, or they are the product of mixed marriages, or whatever it is. They cannot merely neatly be members of the tribes. And we can understand politics as the dynamic association of all these groups. It's not Afro-Indian. And when we go through the politics of our country in depth, you will see that in no way does this Afro-Indian model apply. And when you understand the complexity of the society that we've created, I think we can start to act differently in our society. And that's what I tried to do with this book, to give you a very detailed understanding of it. And I do hope that it still resonates with you. And I see we've reached the 1 hour mark. So we're at the end of my storytelling around the book. I'm not really, from the next Facebook Live will be actually going through the book. But I wanted to set the stage, how and why the book was created. What are the floating ideas, the subtle ideas? Because the book doesn't really talk about the ideas explicitly. but you will see as the story unfolds, these are the themes. So that's it there. I was saying I wanted to take some questions, but uh, I guess I will end the live, I suppose. How to do this. Right, because I couldn't read through. Now I'm seeing it here. I could end the live and we could, I don't know if we could continue and I can take it, or in the next session, I can take those questions. Maybe that might be the better thing to do. So I want to thank you so much for this. Next time, hopefully we'll have the technical issue sorted out and we'll actually be on a Story Club page live. But for now, I want to thank you so much. Let me know if you liked it. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, what you found the most interesting part, what you found maybe I should have skipped. So that would help me on future lives, and we could be more interactive and I can make it more enjoyable. So thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your quarantine weekend, and I'll see you later. Bye.